Pain has a way of making things seem smaller, like sterile white walls, beeping monitors, and the never-ending. People talk about healing as though it's a ladder you climb one step at a time until you're free of the pain of what once was. Entire once more. But they don't explain what it's like to stop trying, to stop moving, to stop hoping that. I can't recall the exact moment, but an accident involving a truck and a red light occurred 6 months ago. We'll never get away from saying that I was fortunate. People say that whenever you're still here, but not completely. I left with 2 shattered ribs and a damaged spine. My wrist was broken, and I had a dozen invisible scars that I could feel every time I glanced in the mirror. I lost rhythm purpose buddies who couldn't sit quietly because of my movement. Initially, all of my family members who loved me more while I was strong came to visit. Flowers, balloons, and well-intentioned jokes that didn't work. But as the weeks went by and I saw them go one by one, not smiling, not improving quickly enough, and not becoming the inspiration they desired. Before she stayed at Ivy League, she wasn't my best buddy. In fact, the girl who brought over was my neighbor and occasionally my workout partner. When I was dumped, Wine sat with me in sweats and we cursed online dating. Guys, and expensive sushi. She was sardonic, steady, always dressed in black, and knew how to briefly discuss it without focusing on her. And I'm still baffled as to why she stayed each week. She arrived every Tuesday, sometimes carrying groceries and other times with books, occasionally with that silent grin that never inquired about my well-being. But in some way, I cried the first time she helped me take a shower because she made it okay to be broken. If you like this content and would like to show your support for the channel, please click the thanks button below. You can directly contribute to the channel by using the one with the $ and heart icon with super thanks. Allows me to continue making amazing movies for you without the suffering caused by the embarrassment of seeing me shaking and nude, almost able to raise my own. She simply held the water at the proper temperature and cleaned my arms without flinching, hair with cautious fingers, and declared, "At this moment, you owe no one strength." And she remained when I was angry and shouted at her when I pleaded with her. She brought Soup Watch to stop wasting her time after I ignored her texts for 2 days in a row. She told me stories that made me laugh, and I painted my nails because I mentioned that I missed the color red. Made me tea today, which I didn't drink, and never once demanded payment. It's Tuesday. The flat is too quiet. The air is cold, and my body feels a little more rigid than. I told her that I wasn't expecting her this week, and that I needed. The knock arrives at 10:09. But I lied since I wanted to see if she would remain nonetheless. My heart skips every time, and I don't move when the door opens. I don't respond to her joking question. Lock, but she enters nevertheless. Ivy always enters. She places the bag on the counter, peeks into the refrigerator, and makes a frown since she knows the layout better than I do. Since Saturday, you have had 3 apples and a bag of string cheese. I wasn't hungry because you never get hungry, but I told you not to come, and I heard you, so I simply closed my eyes and tie additional tofu. I suppose I'll waste my time here since I didn't agree that you were wasting yours. I look at her untidy black bun as she approaches the couch, drops down, grabs the remote, and turns on one of our favorite shows. The smallest trace of eyeliner beneath one eye she looks at in her hoodie combat boots. Her eyes light up when she turns. Yet she feels as though the world has been heavy lately. I answer, "You can leave," as she approaches me as if I'm the item she's been waiting for, quieter than before. But I'm not everyone else, and I can see why. She continues, "You're not who you were before," and it cuts straight through me. I'm trying to keep it together, but who you believe you should be right now is just you. Try not to cry. But something quickly and sharply breaks into a silent sob. I detest that she hears it. She's by my side a moment later, putting her arms around me without asking, me slowly and cautiously, as if she had done this before. My face touched her shoulder. She has a soapy, rainy scent, and her hands stay put and steady. I'm afraid, so I whisper that I'm not sure who I am anymore. But we'll figure it out. I nearly went out with you that first week, but you should have left me when I asked, regarded me as if I were the only thing supporting you. And although I couldn't leave you, I withdrew just a little, enough to see her face. Her eyes met mine, and her face was closer than I had imagined. We both lack the courage to name her yet there's a silence that contains breath and promise. When I utter her name, I quiver as a hand lifts and brushes a strand of hair off my cheek. "I know," she says. "I'm not here to rush you, but just to remind you, my throat isn't ready." For the first time since the accident, I genuinely think she won't leave. And I'm still here. I rest my forehead against hers, but not tomorrow, not next week, and not if I continue to break. Inhale, hold on, and whisper constantly. She adds, and I can feel it in my bones that I'm not. I must have fallen asleep in between the second episode and the sound, even though I didn't intend to do so. I recall the aroma of ivy warming up the pad thai in my kitchen, which included ginger, basil, and other ingredients. My body still ached when I moved, so she would always ask for more hot just for me. I detested the gradual aching that persisted instead of the sudden pain like previously. How it caused me to feel slowly vulnerable, as though I was only partially myself. But when I opened my eyes, I noticed her stirring the noodles in my pan while wearing a hoodie with the sleeves pushed up and barefoot. Her house as well, and I didn't feel broken. Instead, I felt content. She grinned when she saw me observing. You already knew I would, so you slept through the conclusion once more, she added, giving me a wink, which is why I brought food as a diversion, for when you act like you fully understood the narrative. Even though I didn't, imagine if you said something about a pizza guy and alibis, neither of which were pertinent information. She moved the plate over, placed it in front of me, and gave me a, we ate in quiet, and I didn't say thank you or fork without saying anything. She sat with her thigh brushing her mind, as if to remind me that seemed genuine. She nibbled slowly and intently, as if each piece were important. I couldn't remember how much I enjoyed seeing her perform everyday tasks. You want to go outside? She asked abruptly. Well, I was thinking that we could sit in the courtyard, since it's warm today. Tree. I was hesitant because I hadn't gone outside in weeks, observed walking more slowly than before, with a slimmer face and altered posture, which made she must have noticed because her thumb brushed the curvature of my palm, tightening my chest. I wanted to say no, but I was carrying the blanket and everything else. I was about to say no, but something in her eyes encouraged me to try. We dressed slowly, and she assisted me in getting into the comfortable. Her faded joggers, which she had purchased for me last month, now fit her hands. She knotted her hair into a low position, yet they were always there when I needed them, at my elbow and steady at my hip. I put a braid on her hoodie, and she grinned and remarked, "Looks better. On you?" I didn't think she was telling the truth, but I didn't dispute with her outside because it felt like it was the first warmth of spring on a foreign world, full of promise and life. A few stories up, we sat beneath the tree on the seat in the corner, alone with the birds in the branches, catching the breeze. I initially sat rigidly conscious of every scar and contour on my ivy layout next to me, hands behind her, her body no longer feeling like mine. I didn't immediately respond when she asked, "You ever think about what you'll do when you're stronger?" With my head closed, I used to say, "Now it just makes sense." As I watched the wind capture the ends of her braid, "You don't need to ask me about the future because I'm not," she added, acknowledging that I was exhausted. She tapped the side, opening her eyelids, and I wondered what was still within. Gently, "You used to be full of ideas, but when they became quiet, we would whisper." I looked at her till they returned, and her face was gentle and open with no agenda. "Present," I said. "What kind patient are you?" "Unrelenting because I love you, even though I believe you no longer recognize me." "I do," she said, "and I'm prepared to stay long enough to find out whether I'm mistaken." Swallowed hard, but I didn't take her hand because it was still near mine. Pull away, but she stayed that night and inquired all the time. So I never assumed, nodding before she could finish the inquiry. We brushed our teeth together, and I flinched when I saw my reflection. Angles of my body, my gait's rigidity, and my cheek's hollowness. I turned, quickly realized, didn't press, simply gave me her face cream, and added, "You." We lay in bed without touching, but she turned on her, and I forgot this last time. "I detest mirrors," I murmured, glancing at the ceiling with my side to me. "I know I dislike." I turned my head and see that she was holding her breath. "Then, look at me instead." "You're still gorgeous," she remarked, and her eyes are dark and steadfast. She muttered, "I'm saying it because it's important to me, not for you," she acknowledged. "I'm not ready for more, and I'm not asking for more. But I believe, contemplating it occasionally, how my heart might stop if I kissed you." "Would you want to?" "Too desperately," she murmured. "But I didn't say anything until you begged me to." My hands were shaking, and she stretched out, brushing her fingertip over my. "When you're ready," she whispered, pulling the blanket over my knuckles as I lay. She woke up long after she had gone to sleep, remembering what she had said while gazing at her mouth. And for the first time in months, I felt yearning rather than numb. I didn't sleep, and my body wasn't quite motionless. But I kept replaying Ivy's words in my head, as if they were etched into the very fabric of our surroundings. "What?" She had said it so softly, as if it weren't intended, that it would be like kissing you, move the earth underneath me. But it did, and I had spent a lot of time studying how not to. The initial glimmer of one inside me seemed risky, like a live wire that I was unsure how to handle. Saw her sleeping for a while. The way her lips gently parted and her eyelids fluttered when she dreamed. Her face appeared younger, as if she were communicating to a world that only she could see. I pondered how many times I had missed this version of her while I was too preoccupied with being strong. The dark, softer, busy pretending I didn't need anyone and coming apart. And suddenly she was here, still here. I stretched out to give her a gentle touch before I could stop myself. I wanted evidence that she was real, so I put 2 fingers on her wrist and pressed them against her pulse. Hadn't dreamed about her either. She moved and her heartbeat was warm and steady. I apologized in a murmur, my eyelids slightly fluttering open, sleep-soaked and distracted. Didn't intend to wake you? You're okay. And her voice sounded gravelly and silky. So I believe I wanted to feel you. So I blinked a few times before you touched me lightly. She whispered gently, I'm breathing because you're here. And I swallowed the lump in my throat. Hello, may I ask you a question? How would you react if I gave you a kiss? She didn't move when her breath caught. So I'd let you do this with me, but not all. The entire thing. Particularly this part, she stated, because you're still deciding to. I thought that was more courageous than anything else. So I moved closer, my body rigid, and she waited for me to take my time, her cautious nervousness lighting up in ways I hadn't felt in months. I whispered, I don't know if I can do this. As her breath was mingling with mine just inches apart, don't you respond. Not until you're ready. I want to hear her voice whisper against my mouth, then gave me a slow, hesitant kiss. Her lips were warm and sensitive, like if every nerve in my body were holding its breath. She kissed me back as if I were familiar. Even though it didn't make sense, there was no hurry or push, only something holy, something delicate, something blazing. After months of silence, simply lips getting to know one another again. She cuddled my cheek as I pulled away. Trembling, that was ideal. She muttered, I'm afraid I said so am I, but I'm not going to. We didn't say anything as I placed my head on her chest and heard her heartbeat loudly in my ear. Anything else we didn't need to do? The scent of toast greeted me when I woke up, and Coffee Ivy was singing while dancing slowly in the kitchen while barefoot. I briefly observed her as if she were a part of every square inch of my house. Aching yet alive, my heart pounding with something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hunger that goes beyond simply needing food to survive. Her smile blossomed like sunlight as she turned to face me. Good morning. You asked me to make breakfast, and I gave you a kiss, she continued. She brought me breakfast, which I thought was the least I could do. I grinned broadly. On the couch next to me was a cup of coffee, which we sipped quietly until I said, what now? As his leg touched mine and neither of us moved. Now we keep until you're no longer afraid of your reflection. Until you're not afraid of wanting things, she added. Once more, and if I break, I'll help you get back together. She grabbed my hand and laced it with, one by one, our fingers kissed my knuckles. And I realized then that she was still here, and for the first time, I would never be the same. At the moment, I too wanted to stay, but I didn't think the kiss would make a significant difference. Dramatic ways, no pyrotechnics, no profound realization, and no quick fix for all the parts of me that were still broken. Yet during the quiet times, I saw a change in Ivy's appearance. Her hand rested lightly on my back as we walked, not to provide support, and she looked at me as I spoke as if my words mattered, only to remind me that she was there when I first started observing her, not to offer guidance, mouth as she talked. And my body, still apprehensive and recovering, started to lean instinctively into her, so we didn't discuss it straight away. But the silence wasn't heavy. Instead, it was charged as we waited for 2 nights before we returned to the couch. I was nestled against her side and her arm while a movie played in the background, but neither of us was really listening. I didn't recoil when my fingers traced distracted circles on the skin beneath my arm, stretched over my shoulders. I let her to touch me without feeling tense, and my body reacted in a way I hadn't felt before. Months of low, persistent heat that bloomed just under my ribcage. So I closed my eyes and allowed myself to experience the solace she desired. When her fingertip touched my breath caught at the edge of my collarbone, and she waited motionless before gently. She kissed my temple purposefully and said, okay, and I nodded because I could feel her. We remained that way for a time, her fingers never moving, and she smiled against my skin, saying, good, wandered without asking for anything more. But they also didn't stop, and my body, that night, as we lay in bed, our treacherous, healed, pained body started to yearn for more. Her hand was on my stomach, and I was closer than normal, pressing my back against her chest. I was unable to fall asleep because I could feel her warm, steady breath on the back of my neck. I muttered, not with her this close, not with every inch of me humming Ivy. What if I want to feel something even though I'm not ready? Her hand clenched a little before softening, and then we began. I'm afraid that it will hurt more than just my body, yet I'll stop it as soon as it gets too much. I follow your advice and turned to face her. She reached up and ran her fingers down my jaw, saying, I trust you, even in the dark. Her feather-light touch asked, Can I kiss you again? I nodded, and her lips slowly touched mine. And intense. This kiss was different from the first one, because it was directed at her hands. With the respect of someone who didn't want to observe, she slipped down my sides and kissed me till her knees intertwined until I was gently moaning into her mouth, and my fingers snagged her shirt fabric. Her thighs went between mine, and I froze, thinking that perhaps I could fall apart and still be whole. She withdrew. Too much right now. No, I said in a trembling voice. Not too much. Only new. So let's. Moving slowly. Her hands returned to the safer ground, and she never touched my ribs, hips, or mouth. She stopped moving her jaw, throat, and shoulder and kissed every square inch of my skin. Without realizing it, my body took over and I arched into her. And I rolled on top because, for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, I wanted to be touched, not simply comforted. She gazed up at me with dark eyes and tiny legs straddling her waist, filled of an unidentified substance. You sure? She said. No, I said. But I want to experience what it's like to attempt. Her hands remained still as she said, Let me investigate. My hands slipped beneath her shirt, and she breathed in a warm, soft stomach. I kissed her again, more firmly this time on her hands. After touching her ribcage, came to life at last, exploring my back and cradling my waist while observing me. Friction developed gradually, painfully, and exquisitely, yet we never completely stripped. The slow drag of two people didn't have to be limited to lips, hands, and hips. I came undone against her thigh, smothering my cry against her neck as we discovered each other in real time. And she got me through it, leaving me breathless and feeling more alive than I have in months, muttering something I couldn't hear clearly. But it seemed safe, so I fell into her breast, my pulse pounding, tears blazing in my eyes. I never thought I'd feel that way, but she kissed my eyes and said, You're okay? On top of my head. Ivy, yeah, I believe. You'll feel everything again, one step at a time. She kissed my hair once more before saying, I'm falling in love with you, capture you. And I woke up the morning after allowing her to truly touch me. Before her, and I felt like everything inside of me was booming, but not in a happy manner. She was still asleep with one arm wrapped across her head, and the silence felt like the prelude to a storm. Her lips were barely parted at my waist, and her chest rose and fell in a steady, gradual pace. And I lay still, gazing at the ceiling as if it held the answers to my body's problems. My mind was already attempting to wriggle out of serenity, but it was still humming from the previous night. I hadn't seen this sight since the accident. And the voice in my brain was, I heard someone who never truly stops whispering. You let her see too much. I got out of bed as carefully as possible because my back was stiff and my legs hurt. Seemed familiar, yet it seemed more acute today, as if it were reflecting something more profound. I covered myself in the black, soft-colored robe that Ivy had brought me weeks prior. Favorite? I didn't miss the irony as I brewed coffee in the dark. I don't know how long I stood there with the lights off and the machine hissing, as if it were going to drown out my thoughts. I was looking at the cup I was holding when I heard her say, Hey, so I turned to see her standing. One sleeve of my shirt slipped off her shoulder when her hair got untidy in the corridor. Looked gorgeous and rumpled. And worried about you? All right, I lied. She approached me cautiously, like she was approaching an animal, since she couldn't sleep. She studied me, so she didn't want to wake you, but she would definitely bolt you out of bed. Her voice was calm but powerful as she reached out and said, I'm not Kennedy. In a panic, she grounded me by placing her hands on my hips and whispering, I don't know what you want from me. Last night seemed ideal, but I feel like I gave too much now. Perhaps you'll see how her face softened you, and you finally realized how much damage there is, and that it's not worth it. I didn't realize you were carrying damage, but it's different when it's tangible and you can see and feel it when you understand that I'm difficult to touch, move, and even hold, she said. But you think I want easy. You may believe that I stayed because I was anticipating your performance, but I told you otherwise. Perhaps you stayed because I was broken enough to pain you and make you feel wanted. I could see it in her eyes, but she refused to back down and told me not to shrink. I stayed because I care about you and I love you to the extent of having a savior complex. I wanted to because I fell in love with you and I wasn't afraid of you last night. Kennedy made me more certain of what she was saying about us, and I couldn't hold back as I gazed down. Her eyes said, I'll love whoever you become if I never return to who I was. And if that individual is constantly fearful, resentful, and closed off, I'll figure out how. My throat constricted as I held her tenderly. I'm not sure how to accept this as true. She leaned in and pushed her, saying, You just have to let it happen. Forehead to mine. You're not too much, a burden, or a broken person. I'm attempting to fix something. So what am I doing? I asked. You're mine. And your voice cracked. The words weren't enough, so I kissed her after whispering, If you'll have me. Everything was trembling except for her mouth because of my body. Thoughts and anxiety met mine like a promise, and I trusted her, so we continued to hold each other. She didn't ask me to explain, but she was in the dimly lit kitchen with her hands warm on my back and the coffee getting cold. Instead of pushing me further, she simply gave me repeated kisses as if she were. Later, we sat on the couch with her feet in my lap, her kisses constantly telling me that she was not leaving. I watched the light travel across her flesh as I traced the contour of her ankle with my fingers and thought, This is what I want to try something. I remarked about safety, and she said, Okay. Her eyes darkened as she said, Anything. I want to show you what it's like when I'm the one who starts. You don't have to. I want. She gave me a slow nod. So I took her hand and guided her to the bedroom, even though my back was still hurting and my legs were stiff. I purposefully moved to undress her. Her shirt fell off her hands as they trembled, not out of fear but out of respect. Shoulders, her bra came off with ease, and she stood waiting for me, looking lovely. She shuddered when I kissed her ribs, collarbone, and inside of her wrist. I led her onto the bed, climbed over her cautiously, braced myself, and caressed her stomach before my lips met her hip. She moved carefully on one arm and never hurried me, even if her breathing was faint, but she never took her eyes off mine. Tell me what you want, I muttered. I want everything, but only if you're ready, she replied. As I gave her another kiss, let my hands explore. When I kissed between her thighs, my mouth proceeded lower, causing her to moan. She made the most exquisite sound I'd ever heard as she undid beneath my fingertips. When she came down, her hair and body arched softly, not wildly, but with acceptance. I buried my lips in her neck, kissed her shoulder, and lay next to her. She rapped. That was wonderful, she said, drawing me in with her arms. You're, I remarked, perfect. I'm still terrified. And she answered, Be scared, but don't run. Ivy had stayed when I said I wouldn't flee anymore, and I meant it. Someone else did, and I was now staying as well. The days after that night went by the rhythm was quiet, steady, and full of fresh weight that I didn't want to upset anything in my world. Ivy stayed every night, and the weight that grounded me rather than dragged me down. Discuss it. She brought her belongings gradually, starting with a charger, followed by a jumper that she kept, and then a box of tea. I discovered a pair of her socks hidden in the laundry one afternoon, and that was the only thing she drank that was always in my pantry. Had not spoken for weeks, and I felt as though my body was finally beginning to accept that she wasn't going to go. Woke up to her laughing in the kitchen, singing along to awful pop music while her bare feet echoed softly across the floor. She prepared coffee the way I wanted it, sang while she cooked, and still kissed my forehead every morning as if she were, silently reminding me that I'm not alone anymore and that my body is gradually recovering. Although my aches persisted, they weren't controlling my life. I was able to stand for longer periods of time and walk with greater assurance. I was still occasionally startled by reflection, but I didn't cringe as much when Ivy called. As time went on, I contacted her, and one morning she picked up her phone and replied, There's a gallery opening Friday night. I have a friend showing something, want to come with me. My gut perverted the notion that those who hadn't seen you before actually did. Something suddenly rose in my breast as I saw the entire event play out. I don't know, I replied in a tiny voice. 2. She may have been honest when she mentioned that there aren't many people, wine, music, art, and stairs. I didn't respond immediately away, but perhaps freedom is just what's outside these walls. However, I gave it some thought that evening long after she had fallen asleep, her hand resting across my heart as if she were keeping me together as she slept. And on Friday, I wore black, Ivy's favorite basic pants, and I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I had permitted myself to do in months. Halfway through me arranging my hair, she entered wearing a blouse that didn't cling too tightly and paused in the doorway, saying, Holy, too much. I frantically said, Too lovely, and she replied, You're admirable. Don't lie. I'm not, she said as she approached me, but I wish you could. The gallery was small. See yourself the way I do. Maybe I'm starting to. She gave me a gentle shoulder kiss and said, Let's go. I took Ivy's hand in an intimate setting with clinking glasses and cozy lighting. Initially, she made my skin prickle with each eye that passed, but she never let. She introduced me as my person and led me around the room without ever letting me go. Her tone was one of serene pride and casualness, as if it were the most apparent thing in the world. Glanced at a few stairs, but nobody asked or said anything hurtful. Regarding the accident, a man gave me wine. A woman complimented my earrings. And Ivy's buddy, a sculptor, Danny, gave her a hug and gave me a wink. So this is what ultimately convinced her to. Ivy, I smile all the time. Damn, I was beginning to believe it was a myth. Danny shot back when I replied, you stare beautifully. And then added, she's softer with, you're okay. I was at a loss for words. So I grinned. We stayed without being coerced. I don't recall the majority of the artwork for an hour or two, but I do recall how Ivy kept her hand tight to mine the entire time. Just as I had begun, I placed my head on her shoulder in the van. On the way home, to help me breathe. I appreciate you pushing me. Gently, you completed all the work that I couldn't have done without you. Thus, we work well together. I gave her the best jaw kiss. But something changed that night, not in her, but in me. As I watched her sleep, I reflected on the friends I hadn't seen in months, some of whom I'd pushed away. I wasn't furious with those who hadn't stayed. I was just different. Maybe I had to show them the new me since the one they knew didn't exist. I want to go see my sister. Ivy hesitated mid-sentence when I told her the following morning. Yeah, I haven't seen her since the accident. I believe it was too difficult for her to come. You want me to come? Ivy grinned and added, I don't know what I said, but I want to try for myself. I'll take care of it. Just be here when I return. I called you that afternoon every time. When my sister replied, she sobbed and apologized, saying she had assumed I didn't want her there. I apologized and told her that I had pushed everyone away. We decided to have lunch together. Next week, Ivy's pasta making and dancing with me that evening seemed like hope. We laughed till we were out of breath, kissed until the kitchen twirled me gently as if I weren't made of porcelain. And, after the pasta became cold, I glanced at her in bed and declared, I'm falling in love with you more every day. She muttered, grinned, and gave me a little lip kiss. Then fall, I'm already there. I visited my sister that morning. Nothing inside of me felt loud, scared, or broken. It was just raw. Not seen her since the day before the accident, which was more than 7 months ago. At her front door, she gave me a hug and said, call me when you get home. I never did. In the lengthy stillness that followed, she tried her name in the hospital and rehab, would show up on my phone like an injury I couldn't bear to ignore. But I didn't respond, not because I didn't care. I told Ivy I wanted to go, but I wasn't sure how to show her the side of myself I hadn't reconciled with yet. She simply kissed my forehead and helped me select a solution without question. I felt secure wearing that sweater that proclaimed, I'll be right here when you get back. The cafe was tiny, nestled between 2 buildings, and I clung to those words like a rope. I saw my sister through bookstores that had too many windows and not enough shadows. The glass before I entered. She was still wearing her flawless coat, with her hair pulled back. She looked at the door every few seconds, as if she were waiting for a different me that she wouldn't. When the bell over the door sounded as I cautiously entered, she whipped her head up, and she stood too quickly and knocked her water after standing motionless for a moment. I grinned during the process because it was so her, not because it was amusing. I said hello, and as soon as you arrived, she exhaled and her eyes began to well up with tears. Said I would, but I'm exhausted. I didn't think you meant it, and I didn't either, of being terrified of the people I care about. She made a modest but sincere attempt to, putting a soft touch on my forearm made you appear braver, which surprised me. You think I'm bold because I usually am, she said, adding, I'm sorry. Don't be. I wasn't ready even when you didn't answer my calls. I was afraid of what I would say or what you might say about not knowing how to. I responded honestly, help you not be their hurt. But I think I now get it. I said, I wanted to be, but I didn't know how to be enough for you. Except for her, Ivy. I nodded, and she stayed when I yelled at her to stop. Broke apart, but she stayed. Do you love her? I believe I did love her before I realized it. I don't know what to name that, but I do. My sister grinned and started crying. Cheeks, I'm happy you deserved the hours we spent discussing everything and nothing. The accident, her work, and our parents' lack of ability to express their feelings. I informed her about the first time I crossed the room without the condition. And I'm proud of you. Kane about how I cried when I recalled the night I let Ivy touch me, how it felt to want her, and we both sobbed together. By the time as I said farewell, a weight lifted from a wound inside of me, admitted that I wasn't cured yet, but I was able to walk home for the first time. My legs were gradually growing weary, but they remained steady as I opened the door and Ivy had a book in her lap, 2 mugs of coffee, and a blanket draped on the couch. Hey, she replied quietly. How did it go? As soon as she heard me say, hey, looking up at the tea on the table, I sat next to, she firmly placed my head on her shoulder, and I believe I'm more than, all right. She kissed the top of my head. I realize I glanced at her, and I'm proud of you. I'm getting used to it. But that's new to me. She grabbed one of the mugs. Naturally, she knew what I needed before I did, so she gave it to me. Chamomile. We remained that way for a long, with only warmth and breath. No TV, and no outside distractions. I held her hand and interlaced our fingers while listening to the metropolis outside our window. Yes, I did tell her about you. Ivy grinned and said, you saved yourself. Simply waited with some crackers. But I turned to her and said, you saw me when I didn't want to be seen. You stayed when I told you to leave because, following the accident, you were the first thing that felt secure. Her voice was shaking, and you were the most courageous thing I had ever seen. Allow me to love you without expecting anything in return. You earned it each day I learned. I gave her a slow, passionate kiss, as if the silence between us had finally blossomed. When I withdrew, I said, come to my sister's place, because it had grown too large to contain. She wants to meet you properly, so I'm sure she wants to be with me next week. When her eyes glistened, I would have loved to put my head on her lap as she ran her fingers in my hair, and for the first time in months, I wasn't anticipating a problem. Instead, I was simply, although I'm still recovering, I accepted Danny's invitation, Ivy's acquaintance from the nonprofit art and community fundraising gallery, as well as a silent auction with items that were too costly for us to bid on, but the sort of location where people went to be seen by Ivy League students casually reading the material aloud, with one leg folded beneath her and her hair damp from the... I glanced at her and told her, we don't have to go, it's totally skippable. Naked and gleaming in the twilight light, snuggled up in my sweater, and felt, I said, I want to go, as an idea flickered through my mind. Looked up, startled, but cautious not to pause. Yes, are you certain? I'm sick of concealing her smile, which was as gradual as daybreak. Let's go on to the night of the... I wore a black jumpsuit that Ivy had chosen for me last time, and I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I should have. This week, I was surprised by something smooth and soft that gave me just enough of a hug to make me feel like I hadn't vanished. Reflection occasionally, but not tonight. Ivy emerged as I held my own gaze, out the restroom wearing a wine-colored gown that robbed me of all rational thought. She paused in the doorway when, okay, she muttered when she spotted me. You're officially trying to kill me, she said. Seem good, but I didn't mean to make me shiver. Instead, I rolled my eyes and turned as if to look at my earrings. But I was grinning, so she took a step, with your chin lying on my shoulder and your hands slipping around my waist behind me. You're beautifully, she murmured in a low voice. You're mine. Let's go show them what. The location was tasteful but not stuffy, and it appears that we arrived arm in arm. Brick walls, lights, abstract sculptures, corners, and individuals holding champagne flutes as if they'd been doing it from birth. And when we entered, I instantly noticed the double take, the hesitation, and the whisper of curiosity. But I didn't recoil for the first time in a long time when I held Ivy's. Hands tightened. We moved cautiously through the room before Danny grinned and greeted us. She told Ivy, you clean up like someone who knows exactly what you're doing. After having 2 drinks, I'm only here to make her appear even better. Danny, regardless of what they're doing, I said, you're good more than good. And I meant it when the evening arrived. I laughed, talked to people, and mentioned Ivy as if she were the anchor. When someone asked what I did in my new life, which she was, I replied, I used to be in design. Ivy leaned closer, murmuring, you still are, as if it had already been determined. I was drinking when I heard someone tap my shoulder, either a person I knew from my past, Olivia, a friend, or someone similar. Prior to the accident, we attended classes together, worked on projects, exchanged secrets, and had cocktails. That used to feel significant, but she had never called. She claimed, uncertain Kennedy, Olivia, you look fantastic. I nodded and protected you as well. I wanted to get in touch, but I was at a loss for words. So you said, Ivy moved. Although she acknowledged that I made a mistake and didn't know how to be there, Olivia clocked it as soon as her hand touched mine, indicating that you were with her, Olivia said, after a beat. I'm glad you're here. As I mentioned earlier, look glad. I am. She gave me an uneasy smile, saying, it's good to see you too. She left, and instead of pursuing her, I turned to Ivy, which used to hurt. Ivy kissed my cheek, barely holding it. And now I just feel fortunate that she's not you. I want to pull you into a closet because you keep saying things that make her grin. Later, I teased that there would be dessert. She moaned at first, but we stayed late and danced once, gently wrapping her arms around my music pulsating in our bones as my head rests against her collarbone at my waist. On the way home, we walked in quiet, and I felt protected, seen, and wanted. Ivy grabbed my palm as her shoes echoed against the sidewalk. And I'm proud of you for, I'm continuing finding parts. So what for returning to yourself? Let's keep. I stopped walking and drew her close as we looked at each other. You're my kind. I said something bold, so I'd best sit down because I want to do something. Move in with me. And her breath caught. Are you certain that I've... She looked at me with big eyes and never seemed more certain of anything, something that caused my knees to weaken. And she repeated, yes. I kissed her in the streetlight, as if no one was looking, as if we had gone home regardless of what they thought. We made love because we wanted to celebrate, not because it was quick or comfortable, beyond merely surviving. We wanted to commemorate this event as the turning point where hope was restored. It was loud and genuine, not a whisper, and I was entangled with her as I dozed off. My body felt warm and my heart was full, and I understood that this was rebirth rather than just healing. The process of moving in together was gradual, involving one drawer at a time and one toothbrush next to it. As separate, Ivy began bringing more clothes, books, and other items. Another shelf was shared and subsequently ignored, herself into my space, until my apartment began to seem more like our home and less like a rehabilitation cave. It was quieter than I anticipated on the first night she formally remained there, as someone who lived there and didn't merely visit. With no major party with pizza on the couch, bare feet twisted over a pile of boxes in the corner that neither of us wanted to unpack. So we watched something unmemorable and took a quick break to giggle. Despite my fear, I placed my head on her chest and thought, this is what safety is. Not her, not love, not permanence, not tranquility, not the silent assurance that I am here, even when things are difficult, because there have been mornings when I woke up that were difficult. On other days, when my body wouldn't move the way I wanted it to, I found myself looking in the mirror for too long. Some nights, I dreamed about the accident and wondered if she was gone forever. For the person I used to be, I was sweating profusely when I woke up, and the smell of metal and blood was still in my... Ivy never forced me to explain, and she never attempted to correct my thinking. Even when it wasn't genuine, she simply holds me and gently massages my back while whispering, "You're safe. And you don't have to do this alone because I've got you." I would cry, not because she infused the place with warmth in ways I hadn't noticed before. Even as I was breaking, because I was finally being held through it. Discovered that there was no music playing while she prepared notes on the refrigerator for a fresh set of... She made the bed using towels because the previous ones were so scratchy. Her corners were tucked in a military fashion each morning, but she left one free on my side since she knew she used 5 mugs a day, neglected to cover the toothpaste, and enjoyed curling up in the blanket, leaving socks all over the place. Began to enjoy everything one evening, following a demanding day that concluded with a minor triumph while strolling to and from the park. We were laying in bed with our legs entwined and our breaths coming in without having to stop. I said, "What won't she ask us?" "Because I'm afraid the darkness won't endure." She moved closer, handcuffing my face. But it didn't have to be that way. Be flawless to be permanent. But what if I make a mistake? Then we can work together to fix it. You always say the right thing. And I mean it. So I let out a trembling breath. "I'm not here for the version of you that always grins or does everything well," she remarked. "Instead, I'm here for the version that persists despite the disarray." I gave her a slow, deep kiss, and hurting, I kissed her as if I needed to commit every inch of her to memory. She was ingrained in me, and we made love as if we were soul to soul, not simply skin to skin. Nothing to demonstrate. As if we were creating something that only required heat, hands, and mouths, no approbation or acclaim, and the silent hum of 2 people repeatedly selecting one another. When I woke up the following morning, I first watched. Her hair spilled across the pillow as she slept with one arm tucked beneath her head. Considered the girl I was prior to the mishap, the agony, Ivy, and I suddenly came to the realization that I didn't want to return to her since I didn't need to, which made my heart both hurt and swell because I felt stronger, softer, and more entire as the person I was becoming. Despite everything I had experienced, Ivy's eyes were staring at me because of it, pulling at her lips and blinking open a languid smile. I keep staring at her. I corrected her, and she rolled onto her side. "Crack, love of your life," she muttered. We lay there peacefully, warm and comfortable as she slowly placed her lips to mine. Tangled when I stated, "I've been considering doing something risky that begin designing once more as a freelancer. Nothing major, just producing." She pulled. "Kennedy, that's amazing." "I'm scared." "Of course you are," said the back eyes. "However, you don't have to do anything by yourself. Will you assist me?" She said, "Every step," and I honestly chuckled when I said that I was getting you a ludicrous desk chair with lumbar support. She gave me a good cheek kiss and laughed loudly and alive. "I love you." God. I teased our website because I'm going to get really obnoxious while I'm helping you create a website. She made all the necessary corrections. So going forward, we build jointly. The first, Ivy's buddy Danny introduced her to Claire. who was starting a store, downtown wellness center, seeking a logo and brand images. Nothing major. I stared at the email for over 20 minutes after seeing it, even though it was only a little contract that made my heart race. Ivy discovered me on the couch with my laptop glowing in my lap before I opened it. I rotated the screen and she said, "You're pale and tone cold on the side table." She read it again and smiled as her heart raced. So why, I can't remember how. To breathe. This is the first one. My God, what if I say yes and because this is how you are. You unfreeze after she said, "Freeze?" Then you freeze. A storyteller, a designer, and a survivor who creates beauty. I swallowed hard. Since the accident, I haven't worked on a genuine project. When it came time to press reply, my hands trembled, but I didn't stop. Agreed. So I made up a call for Thursday morning over the course of the following few days. With a mixture of quiet fear and enthusiasm, Ivy assisted me in transforming the guest room into a workstation furnished with the absurd chair, she said, would bring creative ideas. A corkboard I used in college. And plants. Energy. She gave me snacks each time I sat down and created songs for focus mode. You need to eat like a creative again. Mom would remark at the desk, kissing my head and letting me drop a bowl of fruit or crackers next to me, then vanishing into the kitchen while humming a gentle tune. Ivy stood behind me at my workstation 10 minutes before to the call, her hands on my shoulders, her warmth constant throughout She muttered, "I'm going to stay in the living room." On the fabric of my shirt, "You've understood, but I'm right here." "All right." I inhaled deeply and observed her as she walked. As soon as the screen appeared, the call started, and I started studying Claire, was generous and excited. She had viewed some of my earlier work via Danny and adored She discussed the use of soft textures and typography in healing places. Breath. And as she talked, something in my instincts clicked back into place. I began making suggestions before I could give them too much thought. Tones, thin line drawings, and color transitions. By the time we hung up, took notes on instructions and a start date, shut down the laptop, and just remained silent while I sat there. And then I began to cry, not out of dread at the release. Ivy was sitting cross-legged with her in the living room when I entered, feeling as though perhaps I wasn't gone. Diary. Her face lit up the moment she saw me, but I remained silent, straddled her lap, kissed her, and cuddled her face with both hands while he traversed the room. She gave me a long kiss in return, her hands moving slowly as if the answer were in her mouth, pouring down my back as if she could sense every wall crumbling as we parted ways. I muttered, "I'm back," grinned and put my forehead to hers. "You never left. You simply needed time." "Thank you. We appreciate your patience and your decision to return that evening so we could prepare dinner." Laughing over burnt garlic and wine that was far too dry, we danced together between the stove and the sink, regarding furniture holiday ideas, the aspiration to create a website that eventually evolved into a larger company. Ivy swirled her wine and remarked, "You design, I organize. So we could do it together in the studio. You want to create a creative mess out of your disorder, which will resemble a power couple." I didn't respond verbally because I want to develop a life with you and do business with you. Later, while cuddled up in bed, I gathered her in my arms and embraced her as if the world beyond our windows didn't exist. As I knotted my limbs, I remarked, "I used to think the accident ended everything. Now, she repaired it, and I simply held the door open for you. Now, I believe it started something better." Went above and beyond, drawing a line across her ribcage. "You stuck with me through hell, and I fell in love with." "You're quiet," she said, "and I'll continue to love you even if there's a lot of noise." Then she gave me a lingering kiss, added that we didn't have to say "I love you" again, because we deserved it all. As we lay there, our bodies were crushed together like the last note of a song, and we listened to each other breathe. I opened a blank canvas in the morning, and took a long time to discover its melody. Ivy gave me coffee on my screen as the sun streamed in through the window, and I started to recreate for us to enjoy the life we've made from, not for survival, the wreckage, and this time I didn't turn around. I sincerely appreciate your help. Whether you like, remark, share, or write a heartfelt thank you, create a huge impact on the channel. I'll see you in the next